And John, we seem to have done a lot of accessories and everything. So we've seen how pins and needles and everything works. So John's going to show you how to make them now.
Okay, so we're going to make, I don't think we're going to make a pin and needle, but we'll make a pin, I think, today. So if Debbie pans over to where I'm pointing at the moment, what we have in the little bowl there are two pins which have what are known as two-turn pin heads. And those type of pin heads were the common garden everyday pin for centuries. I'm doing effectively a medievalish pin, but they went right through until the advent of modern machine-made pins. So let's start how we're going to make them. So we start with a bit of what the archaeologists will call copper alloy. This happens to be brass, it could be bronze. Brass is copper and zinc, and bronze is copper and tin. And not all brass is created equal, shall we say. Normally, to get wire this thing, you use something called a draw plate. And this is a draw plate. You can get that.
Yep.
And you can see it's got loads of holes. Actually, getting small. No, what's going on? Right, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And how you make your wire the right size is you file the end down, and push it through the smallest hole you can get it in, and draw it through. And that makes that piece of brass or bronze slightly smaller. And then you file the end down and push it to the next size hole and put it through. And gradually you can get to the size of the wire. Now, when you're doing that, something is happening to the brass. It's called work hardening. And that's because you've been working it and it gets harder. That happens with most metals. Now, if you continue to do that, then what would happen eventually, the brass will become very brittle and would eventually break. So if I use brass that's been work hardened too much, I have problems. I will show you what happens with a piece of brass that I know is too hard to work with. Let me take out the end, and I'm going to, if I was going to make a needle, I'll just put a flat on it. And what will happen is, you'll see, there we go. I'm going to go to the cut over there. Now, if you can see, I hope you can see, there's a lot of crack beginning to appear in the metal. Can you see that, Debbie?
Yeah.
Okay.
There.
Yeah.
Go back a bit.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
it. You can see it there.
Right. Okay. And that's because it's overworked for making a pin or a needle. The needle in that case, because I'm slowing through the needle. It also means it's too hard to accept the head of the pin that I'm going to make. So I'm using what's known as half-hard brass rod, which means it's been worked, but it's not overly worked, and therefore is not too hard. One of the things you want from a pin or a needle is a nice sharp point. So one way of achieving that is to work harden it more. So what you could do quite simply, if I take a middle piece of brass or this big piece, is again do exactly as I was doing before, and just work, push it one way, turn it round a bit, hit it again, push it the other way, and keep working the brass over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and that will make the end of the brass I'm using hard, but not too hard. At the other end, where I want to work it for other things. So having got our brass nice and hard, and if you work it properly and use the right type of brass, the right constituency of copper and zinc, you can make a brass pin at the end as hard as steel. And that's what we use for pins now, is steel, because it's a harder, durable metal. So that's what we've done there. What we need to do now is put a point on it. Now, when I first started to make pins, I was told pinner used one of these things, which is called a pinner's bone, and it comes from the thigh bone on a cow. Now, and I was told what you do is you take a piece of brass, and you take a file and you file it. Turn it round, you file it. Turn it round and you file it. Turn it around and you file it. And so on until you get something that looks a bit like a point. Now, as I'm sure you can see, this is a laborious process. And it'll take forever to do. Although I can get something approaching a point fairly quickly. You can see that's not exactly brilliant, but it's a quick indication, if you flopped over, of what I'm trying to achieve. Now, almost certainly they didn't use the pinner's bone for just sharpening because that was takes too long. And I know later on they used grindstones for sharpening the ends of needles. So it's almost certainly even the medieval period. We don't actually know what they were doing, not from the evidence I've found anyway, exactly how they were doing it. In fact, very little is known about how pins were made precisely. So I suspect they were using a grindstone in much the same way as they do today, effectively, and in the sort of 18th and 19th century. I didn't explain properly about a pinner's bone, so I'll go back. So thigh bone from a cow, and you'll notice, if Debbie zooms in a little.
Yes. I'm zooming in a little.
Okay. You can see there are grooves, and that is also very convenient for popping your bit of brass, clamping it with your thumb, so you can work on the brass, your needle, whatever. Right. Now, the other part of the pin, if your Debbie pops over, pop over, you can see the actual head is actually a separate piece of brass. I'm actually using, for the body of the pin, this is a piece of brass which is approximately 1.2 millimeters, or if you do old money, it's 3/64. The head is made from a different piece of wire. It's thinner. This is approximately 0.8 of a millimeter, or in old money, 1/32 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is, this is a little machine that I've made. I don't know precisely what they used, but they must have used something very similar. I'll put a little hook on the end of my little wire, and I have now this piece of steel here is called a mandrel. It's just what we call it in engineering. It's a round piece of steel. I'm going to support the other end. It's under lots of pressure when I start to work. And I'm going to make a coil. And the coil has to be laid so it's right next to each other. Not that close. So it looks like a little spring, and I'll show you on the close-up camera in a moment. Okay, so in close-up camera you can see a little spring. Now what I have to do, and this is where bad eyesight or good eyesight is necessary, and I'm now a septuagenarian and finding this increasingly difficult. In fact, about 18 months ago I said I'm not making any more pins and needles, and had we not had COVID, my kit, my tools would have gone to some friends. They were going to buy all my bits and pieces off me, and I was going to teach them how to make pins and needles. But of course, that hasn't happened.
Need a magnifying glass.
No, that's no good. Come on. That's a bit rubbish.
It went somewhere.
It went somewhere. There we are. I'll pop that in the, take it out for a moment, and pop that in the bowl. You see, it's a little coil. Make that clean.
You see that top there?
And it's exactly 2 turns. Very important. So what I need to do now is slip that 2 turns. That's a bit rubbish at the end there. So I'll just move it up a fraction. That needs to go onto the shaft of my pin, and I'm going to get it round to the end. So I've made another little tool I've made just for pushing that down. Otherwise, you hurt your fingers. Try and let people see. Just pushing it down so it's near the end. So you see what I've done now. I've just pushed it onto the shaft. Yeah. Right. Now what we need now is another little tool that I made. And basically it's a steel plate and it has some holes in it. And one of the holes is just a little larger than the shaft of my pin. But on the very top is a very specially shaped recess, which took me a long time to work out what the shape should be. So we pop our pin in there. And we tap the shank of the pin almost all the way down, and then I have a punch which again has a hole in, just a little bit larger than the shaft of the pin, and again a recess, and I've worked out how big it has to be. Then I have my specially weighted hammer. I just snug the coils together and gently. And then I give it one very sharp smack, like that. There you can see now, the pin head is crimped on. Now, there's no solder involved, it's just crimped. Henry, I think it's Henry VIII, said that you should, because there was concerns of qualities of heads falling off, that they should be soldered on. And while there is evidence that some pins did have their heads soldered on, the vast majority of finds don't show any sign of solder on the head itself, because if you do it properly, a crimped head is more than sufficient. I've made hundreds of pins, and I've never had a customer complain about the head falling off, because it doesn't happen. So we've got a bit of a ragged edge there. So what I need to do is take my pinner's bone, get rid of that so you can see roughly what I'm doing. All I'm going to do is take the top end of the pin's shank off by filing it, just make a nice smooth finish to the pin. What's up?
Esther wants to know, can you make her a little machine, please?
Say that again.
Esther wants to know if you can make her a little machine.
That's some Dutch friends of ours.
Silver, Linda.
Silver, Linda, yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Can't
see what John's doing, sorry.
Yeah, I think the picture might be frozen. Or...
Okay,
It's me.
I'll tell you what I'm doing.
Fault.
So I'm taking my pinner's
You see,
bone.
I said I was on the cameras. I forgot to flick the machine back.
The top of the pin head was a little ragged because we got a bit of a shank sticking out. So basically placing the pin onto my pinner's bone, taking a file and just filing the top of that shank down very gently for a nice smooth finish. Fine file now, just to smooth it off. And then
I've got to go back over there now. Back to that one.
and there is the head finished.
210 head.
There we go. And that's about 15
And that's about
minutes.
it.
That's about right, yeah, about 15 minutes.
Are there any other questions?
Any questions from anybody? I'm quite happy to ask some questions. There's a lot we don't know. When we were in, now, and my apologies to my Dutch friends, Sertogenbosch, or if you like me, you can't really say that, Den Bosch, which is where Hieronymus Bosch come from. And I was asked to go and do pin making there because Den Bosch was a centre of pin making historically. And they asked me, so the museum asked me to go and have a nose at their pins because they didn't know how to make them. And we saw lots of Detroiters, like these bits of wire like this, where there was little coils like so. You know,
No, I'm going back over there.
go back over there, yeah. So they found little bits of wire with the coils on the end, and the various Detroiters of making pins. And they had a very unusual pin, which I've never seen anywhere else. Well, no, it's not true. I've seen one other place. They have a pin that's head, which is about in relation. I think you're back over here now.
Yeah, I'm back over there.
About that size, and it's made of two hemispheres, flat copper, made into hemisphere and then fixed. But they weren't soldered, and I can't work out how to make these. I've seen only one other place in Europe where they have such a pin, and that was in a museum in Trelleborg in Sweden. And that they didn't know it was a special pin until I told them.
So the challenge for the pinners.
see if any pinners out there, see if you can make one of those, a Den Bosch pin. Right, there you go.
But thank you for that. Gosh, it's been fascinating today, isn't it? All you people making your own machines and everything.